Hey guys, Turk here, hope you're having a great day. Rather than doing an intro, let's jump straight to the topic. Over the past couple weeks, we've gotten some performance leaks when it comes to the Steam Deck from across the internet, and judging by you guys' response over at the Steam Deck subreddit, man, we are getting pumped for this fourth quarter release. However, there's one thing to keep in mind, and that is leaks are leaks. Everything should be taken with a grain of salt. All the reviews from the Resetera as well as the Chinese outlet, they're not being performed by performance reviewers like myself, so there's a lot left to be desired from those two different publications. However, there are quite a bit of details that we can take from those leaks and actually validate it with our mocked up Steam Deck hardware. Now, I've covered my Steam Deck setup quite a few times here on the channel, so if you're interested in learning more about the hardware specification, the software that's running on the deck, or even some of the special features such as Game Scope or Proton, hit the pause button and check out the link at the top right. That way you can get a deeper knowledge of what's going on with your Steam Deck. But in order to catch you guys up to speed for this video, let's cover some of the higher level specifics. Now, I'm going to be running a Ryzen 5700G APU, and I'm going to be downclocking the graphics solution to 1.6 GHz. I'm doing this in order to better match the Steam Deck's RDNA 2 based solution, because both of these processors have 8 compute units, but we have to make the jump from Vega all the way up to RDNA 2. When it comes to the CPU, I'm also going to be cutting the core count in half to match the 4 cores and 8 threads, and I'm going to be setting the clock speed to 3.5 GHz. On the memory side of things, I'm overclocking this APU up to a spicy DDR4 4200, which I do admit it's not exactly the LPDDR5 5500 that the Steam Deck advertises, but given what we've seen from some of these leaks and the numbers you're going to be seeing in this video, things are going to be pretty dang close. And given my knowledge of how Vega maps from Vega to RDNA and then RDNA to RDNA 2, guys, I think we're going to be in a good spot when it comes to performance predictions. And I think what better place to do this is than compare it to some of the leaks. So before we get to the leaks, I do want to kind of calibrate and do kind of a control experiment in order to make sure our deck is on the right path. Now, Linus Tech Tips had their hands-on time with the Steam Deck over a month ago, and they were able to get some hands-on time with Doom Eternal. Through his video, he mentioned that he was playing at 800p resolution in the medium detail settings with no dynamic resolution scaling in place. When we go to the exact same point in the map, my deck almost matches their performance to the frame. I think they report 58 FPS, I'm getting 57. Now, you can't confirm a match with a single data point, but it is a promising part. Overall, in my 5-minute bench loop on this first stage, I get 63 FPS on average and 42 on the 1% lows. The first set of leaks come over at Resetera. It's kind of a gaming industry tech forum where developers and gamers all get to collaborate and talk to one another. Unfortunately, in the Steam Deck thread, the developer that leaked this information, he has scrubbed his original posts, and it's kind of hard to find that data. If you guys were curious about what his posts actually said, definitely go to the Steam Deck subreddit, because some of you guys took some screen caps of what he wrote, and you could probably find it elsewhere on that forum. Now, that developer confirmed performance from Skyrim, No Man's Sky, Control, Resident Evil 2, and Monster Hunter World. Lucky for us, I own 4 of these games, so let's walk through them. Skyrim is a logical start, and it even lands in our top 10 games to play on the deck. Skyrim is on practically all the different major consoles of the last decade, so why not throw it at the newest handheld on the market? According to the leak, the deck automatically picks up the high detail setting, and on my rig, I get the same result. So far, so good. As for performance, 60 FPS is claimed, though I'm not exactly sure if they're using Mango HUD or the Steam internal FPS counter. Regardless, firing up Skyrim on my device, I land at an average FPS of 60 and 1% lows of 56. To me, that sounds like a solid 60. However, let's keep in mind that I might be in a different spot than the leak, but overall, I'm 2 for 2. No Man's Sky also landed on our top 10 list. The Recetera Leaks report another solid 60 FPS at the default settings. Harnessing my inner Elon Musk and loading up an early game save after creating a base, I also am running around the map at a solid 60 FPS. As for settings, it turns out it defaults to standard, which honestly doesn't look all that bad on the 7-inch screen. However, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, VSync is on by default, and the default maximum FPS is set to 60. So if we disable VSync and crank up the maximum frame rate, the frame rate can boost up to 81 on average and 58 on the 1% lows. So I think it's safe to say that I'm 3 for 3. And in case you were curious, we are at a comfortable 56 and 38 FPS with the enhanced detail settings for average and 1% lows respectively. Now, I tested Resident Evil a bit differently in a previous video, so we're going to stick to the Recetera Leaks and run 800p at both the recommended spec and the maximum spec. Their reported frame rate was between 30 to 60 FPS with the max settings and a solid 60 with the recommended settings. And wouldn't you know it, as I run around the intro area of the police station at maximum settings, I'm averaging 49 FPS with 1% lows of 34. Moving to the recommended settings, a comfortable 82 FPS on average is achievable, and again, 1% lows of 56. Keep in mind that the game area can drastically change the frame rate depending on the lighting, particle effects, and the models on the screen. However, I'd say I'm pretty dang close. I'd call it 4 for 4. Now for the moment of truth, Control. Resetera tested the game in a couple of different modes. First was native 720p rendering with native rendering resolution at the low detail settings. Performance is reported as a close to 60 FPS, so I translate that to around 50 FPS. Loading up those same settings and traversing the hallway of doom, I overachieve with an average of 55 and 41 on the 1% lows. That's nearly 10% above my interpretation of the leak, but I do think there's a little bit of wiggle room in that translation. The next setup is running 720p with a 540p internal resolution and the medium detail setting. As we saw last week in our docked video comparison, medium is a challenging detail setting to run, but sure enough, firing it up, I achieve 48 FPS on average, 33 FPS on 1% lows. Now, according to Digital Foundry, the hallway of doom is one of the most stressful sections of the game, so it makes sense that I'm about 5% off the leak. With Control, I overachieve with the low detail settings and I underachieve with the medium detail settings. However, guys, that's like a 7 FPS window that I'm getting in my particular setup, so I think I'm in a pretty good ballpark. So I'm going to call that 5 for 5, but let me know down in the comments what you think my score is up to this point. Overall, I really do like the Recetera Leaks. The resolutions and the detail settings are clearly defined. However, when it comes to the performance results, they are a bit loose in that verbiage, so there's a little bit of room for interpretation. But given the numbers that I'm reporting in this video, I think it's a pretty credible leak. Now, the latest leaks come from a Chinese media site called alley213.net, and there's definitely some questions how they actually got their hands on the Steam Deck. Not to mention the likely violations of Valve's NDAs that have actually caused several other developers to scrub some of their social media posts. However, I hold no obligations to Valve, so all of this is fair game for my setup. The most credible piece of data from that leak is their results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider. As a benchmarking staple, we are given average FPS, CPU, and GPU render times, which is a gold standard for my setup. They are reporting at 800p in high detail settings, they hit 36 FPS on average. Running the same settings with the Steam Linux runtime, I hit 37 FPS. After tweaking their settings, they report hitting 60 FPS, and I'm able to hit 62 FPS. However, there are a couple things to note. My CPU score is significantly higher. Their screen caps quality is laughably bad, but we can see that some of my CPU frame rates are 3 digits, while their are only showing 2. As a result, I'm only GPU bound 99% of the time, while they appear to be gated 92% of the time. This is due to my CPU running in kind of a overclocked setting when compared to the Steam Deck, and it's likely boosting my scores even further. Now, I could go into Linux and mess with the governors and set maximum and minimum clock speeds, but I think the bigger picture here, guys, is that when running games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we are in fact GPU limited most of the time. The other thing is, how are we actually running the game? Shadow of the Tomb Raider does have a native Linux client, but is that what they're running? If we engage any Proton translation, we do in fact go down to 36 FPS, since the CPU does have to translate the DirectX 11 calls to Linux consumable commands. Regardless, that's a lot of words to put behind that I am off by 1 FPS, so I'm calling it 6 for 6. Doom 2016 is pretty straightforward, similar to what Doom Eternal was able to do. They report 800p at medium detail settings and achieve 60 FPS. In the first level's outdoor area, I measure right at 58 FPS averages and 45 as my 1% lows. To me, that's close enough. Now we get to some questionable results. Cyberpunk 2077 is reported as running between 20 and 30 FPS at high detail settings, which seems overly ambitious. At those same settings, I measure 23 FPS in the first opening gunfight, while the car chase scene towards the end of that first mission is right at 21. Now, an observation I saw here that is my CPU is pegged in the upper 60 while running the benchmark. If we are running our CPU too fast here, why would our CPU still continue to struggle here? Another caveat for me is that I'm running the GOG version through Lutris, so there could be some differences between each platform's implementation. Regardless, I don't think these results are as reliable as some of the others. Still, at least my simulated Steam Deck is in the right ballpark. Lastly, the easiest game to drive on the list is Dota 2. In my original 5700G review, I achieved 74 FPS at the highest detail settings at 1080p, so reducing the frequency and the resolution, it should scale pretty reasonably, right? However, Ali213 reports 800p results at 47 FPS at the highest detail settings and 80 FPS at the lowest detail settings. In my testing, I see 98 FPS at the highest detail setting and 120 at the lowest. And if I even change to a different setting, I can get it to like 80 at the highest detail setting. So it's still a really huge discrepancy. But given the rest of the results we've seen here today, there's quite a bit of a disconnect. So this begs the question, what is their setup? Earlier in their article, they mentioned plugging in a different setup, like with an external monitor, an external keyboard, in order to get into a more playable setup. So are they reporting the external monitor results? If that's the case, I run a match at 61 FPS with dips to 40 FPS. So that's closer, but I don't think that's the full story. I feel that they're actually running a bot match, which uses some internal AI to drive some of these characters. And as we saw with the Shadow of the Tomb Raider result, I think that by adding additional load to the CPU, it's artificially hitting their performance numbers, and I think that's the larger disconnect here. However you want to spin it though, guys, I do think Dota 2 is going to play admirably well on the Steam Deck. So I think today we've learned 3 important lessons from the leaks. Now first, I think that given enough information about the resolutions, the detail settings, and some of the setup that they're using, validating the performance is pretty straightforward. Heck, I'd even say the more information they give us, the more valid the leak actually becomes. So like the Shadow of the Tomb Raider output, that's very credible and it's really hard to spoof, as well as some of the Recetera leaks where they went into like the render resolution, the output resolution, the detail settings. I thought all of that was great and it was actually really easy to implement, and my hardware did a really good job of simulating it. Second is that we need to be honest with our interpretations of the leaks. I have seen several different posts over at the Steam Deck subreddit claiming that Cyberpunk 2077 at the high detail settings is able to hit 30 FPS. Though technically that's true, it is pretty misleading. As we saw as we go into the Ali213 report, they actually mentioned several instances of the frame rate skipping, and the performance that I'm able to show today actually confirms those observations. It's just the headlines aren't really matching up with the reality of the settings. So rather than spread misinformation, I think it's important for us to understand the capabilities and the restrictions of the Steam Deck rather than just hoping for the best and being overly optimistic. Now the third thing is my own reliability. As you know, I've made several different videos here on the channel, and to be quite honest guys, y'all have been pretty critical of the performance numbers I've been showing, and to be honest, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm a pretty new YouTuber here, and to claim that the performance numbers are going to be what they are, that's a pretty bold statement. However, when I make corrections and I make mistakes, I want to make sure to correct those and propagate it forward. If you saw my hardware description video, I originally had my iGPU set to 2.3 GHz because I was a little bit over-optimistic when it comes to the RDNA 2 performance per watt claims. But when I saw that Linus Tech Tips video, I was overshooting it. I was around 63 FPS in that specific spot, so I dialed back my clock setting, and going back to the performance per watt chart, this clock speed actually fits that calculation a lot better, and the performance that we're showing today just further validates my particular setup and hopefully gives you guys a platform as to what other games we could be expecting to play on the Steam Deck. Of course, this is all pre-production hardware with pre-production versions of software. We don't even know what final versions are going to be actually included in SteamOS 3. But I guarantee you guys that as soon as I hear additional information or I see the GitHub changes, I'm going to be loading it up on the deck and trying to see if there's any improvement. And that's the video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. Every week I post a poll over at the community tab wondering what you guys want to see in next week's video. And sure enough, next week we're going to be diving deep into ray tracing and why exactly it tanks our performance so bad. So if you guys are wanting to contribute to the content here on the channel, hit subscribe, check out the community tab, and let your voice be heard. As always, I love talking nerdy with you down in the comments, so can't wait to hear you guys say that I'm wrong. But again, appreciate you guys. Turk out.